Hello, everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome to our webinar today on Zero Trust Networks. I'm Patrick Albert, VP of Product Management at Auvik Networks. And today we're really lucky to be joined by Nick, who is a security expert for security fanatics. You may have even heard of him on some of our podcasts recently. And today we wanted to ask him to lead a quick discussion a great discussion around Zero Trust Networks. Nick, before we go ahead and get started, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself a little bit?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for having me. And guys, bear with me a little bit. I'm actually fighting the flu and losing my voice. So here we are. Just a couple of things. I am the chief security fanatic of Security Fanatics. This is an outfit that's dedicated to all things cybersecurity, cyber warfare, cyber terrorism, infrastructure, government compliance related. As it says on the screen, I co-authored a book called Easy Prey, which I did. I wrote on compliance for that. I have a nationally syndicated radio show. I am a member of the Forbes Technology Council. I write regularly for Forbes as well. And I like to say that this isn't in my blood, it's in my DNA. I very much love what I do, but that's me in a nutshell. And again, thank you for having me.
Awesome. That is quite the resume. And just to add on to you having a flu, I know you're also traveling right now too. So again, appreciate you joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me again.
No worries. So just before we go ahead and get started, just a couple of really quick housekeeping items. This webinar will definitely be recorded. And we're expecting it to last between 45 minutes and probably an hour. And we'll likely get a chance to do a bit of a Q&A afterwards towards the end. So if you have any questions for Nick, absolutely pipe in and we'll do our best to answer them at the end, knowing that most people do have a hard stop at the end of the hour. So on the topic of Zero Trust Networks, so over the years, I've personally been hearing more and more about the idea of zero trust in general and zero trust when it comes to networking more specifically. But the general feeling I usually get from MSPs is that of basically fear, uncertainty, doubt, kind of a mixture of those emotions. So I wanted to use today to do a bit of an introduction and get Nick to explain from his perspective what they are, why they're important. And let's discuss some of the practical kind of use cases and ultimately some of the benefits and costs and kind of risks associated with them as well. So just trying to give a really good sense of what it is and why it's important and when it's useful and when it's not. So Nick, why don't we go ahead and get started with that? You want to go ahead and just brief everyone on kind of the concept of zero trust just in general, and then we'll dive into a bit deeper into how it relates to networking?
Sure. So I think before we actually dive directly into zero trust networking, I think we need to understand the state of security today as it comes to network infrastructure. Now, as most people know, and I know I'm speaking to a room full of MSPs, so I can speak some pretty fluent nerd here, we're all running perimeter-based networks. That is the standard. That has been how we have designed TCP/IP networks for probably decades at this point. And we have always had this assumption of when we are looking at creating security for a network within a perimeter-based network, that we run the trust but verified model. In other words, you have a login, you have a computer, it is accepted into the network, and then you validate credentials for that. When we are moving towards something like a zero trust infrastructure, we're actually reversing that, and we are running what is called verify but trust. Because if I trust you before I verify you, I'm actually giving you a foothold into my infrastructure before I challenge you for credentials. Now, we are looking at actually validating not just the identity of the user or the machine, but we're also looking at validating the traffic that comes through it. And this is the foundation of what a zero trust network is. At its core, when we are looking at a perimeter network versus zero trust, in a perimeter network, if I have two computers in that network, they can talk to each other openly through TCP/IP on a LAN. But in a zero trust networking environment, basically any traffic that goes from one computer to another from inside the perimeter is then, going to be filtered for threat analysis before I'm successfully allowed to talk to the other computer. That is essentially zero trust networking at its core. Some people call it segmentation. That is an aspect of zero trust networking, but zero trust networking is segmentation with validation of threat.
Yeah, so thanks, Nick. I think it's a really good point to kind of level set on that. And I think it's such a really important point of 20 years ago, as you mentioned, kind of when we first started building networks that look and feel similar to the style that we still use today. We kind of assumed that trust was implied, and therefore we built a network surrounding that. But I think the state of the market's also drastically shifted, because back in that type of model, you had a lot of infrastructure that was on premise, and devices actually legitimately needed to talk to each other for actual valid reasons. Like I remember setting up file shares locally on my machine, and people legitimately business-wise actually had to grab stuff on it before we had a centralized file share server. So there were a lot of legitimate use cases back then. So as we're shifting more and more to SaaS-based applications and relying less on on-premise infrastructure, would you agree? Have any comments on I think this is the right time to potentially look at reorganizing your networks based off of some of those assumptions or assumptions that may not be valid anymore?
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at this, most MSPs that I know are going to walk into an environment, and if they're building it from scratch, they're going to build a perimeter-based network. And as you just said, as we're moving to SaaS and the cloud, we have less and less reason for devices to communicate with each other, let's say with the exception of printers, for example. And so what we should be looking at in terms of cyber defense strategies is a way that we can isolate technological infrastructure from one another that don't necessarily need to be talking to each other. Or if they have to be talking to each other, then we're looking at filtering that traffic, not just for threat, but also for whitelisting of applications in traffic. So perfect example, if I have two computers again on a network, and I will just use basic examples here, then let's say they're only allowed to talk about Word and Excel. And so as soon as I try to query one other machine about PowerPoint, my zero trust infrastructure should shut it down and saying, no, you're only allowed to talk about Word and Excel. And then anything Word and Excel goes through, intrusion detection, antivirus, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, we are moving to the cloud. And if we're looking at the most recent studies from groups like the CSA or Cloud Security Alliance, for the first year, or rather for the first time in 2017, their survey put over 50% of all corporations and organizations out there actually trusting the cloud more than on-prem solutions, primarily because the cloud, aside from uptime, for availability, we have the ability to secure data in a much more significant way, not to mention patching inoculation and patching turns around a lot faster typically. So we are ripe to start seeing zero trust networking become the foundational design for what networking is, basically throwing out the perimeter defense, design that we've used for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. The joke that kind of goes around our office is typically the only valid use case, or not valid, the only use case that you really have for a PC to talk to another PC nowadays is actually just to spread ransomware.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, outside of printing, there's usually not much reason to do that,
Yeah, no, absolutely, and even on that, I think we're starting to see, not necessarily a large movement, but more and more cloud-enabled printers. So things like going through Google Cloud Print and other services. So we're starting to see some of that as well, which I think there's a whole other discussion around security around that aspect. But
definitely.
But yeah, no, its point stands. Printing is probably one of the remaining legacy valid use cases for a device to be talking drastically through a network.
Right, exactly.
So I think that gives us a pretty good intro to the topic. I think you've already kind of alluded to why it's important. So I think what would be really beneficial is to start talking about some of the fears and objections and concerns that a lot of people I've talked to have. And I think that we can divide them probably pretty easily into a couple of major categories. But I think it'd be really useful to start going through that, because generally speaking, when we talk to a lot of people, the thought is, this is going to be really expensive to set up. I can't justify this to my customers. What happens if I miss something that's in terms of like an actual valid situation where devices should be talking to each other, and I've gone and set up this entire new network, and what the costs associated to me. So there's a lot of cost and objection handling, I think, that I'd like to break through. And maybe why don't we go ahead and start with that point. So just at a high level, what are some of the major kind of first milestones or first steps that you need to take from a cost perspective? So like what maybe just lay out kind of a high level of the process involved of kind of going from nothing to a zero trust network. And we can definitely explore this in a lot more deeper technical context in future webinars, but at least at a high level, what does that look like?
So if I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the foundation of a zero trust network in the same, from an infrastructure standpoint, I'm looking at a zero trust network in the same way that I'm looking up setting up a core cyber defense strategy. And so what we are starting with is the next generation firewall. And one of the things that I see a lot of MSPs do is they'll use next generation firewalls, but the problem that we have is that a lot of these firewalls, while they walk the walk, they don't necessarily talk the talk. On paper, I can be looking at two products that say they have the same session traffic, same 0-day, same layering, same whitelisting, but the actual threat detection technology that's baked into them by the manufacturers can be radically different. And so it's very important to make sure that we are foundationally starting there, which is probably one of the most expensive pieces of a zero trust networking design. But I like to tell my clients this. And one of the things when I'm talking about zero trust networking with my clients is I'm making sure not really to speak nerd. I want to make sure that, in the same way that, like, if I go to my accountant, for example, and she starts talking about the taxes that I owe or whatever, my eyes gloss over. I just want to know, bottom line, okay, is this what I owe to the IRS or not? And then sign off on it. A lot of our clients, we need to be speaking to at that executive summary level. And so one of the ways that I talk to them about getting the right technology is I say, look, I can go on Amazon right now and buy karate pajamas and a black belt, throw it on and walk down the street. And people are going to say, oh, there goes a black belt. As soon as you get me in the ring with a black belt, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to get my butt kicked. And so if I'm looking at this foundationally, this is a lot of what they understand, but it starts with the next generation firewall. And you need something with good IDS, IPS, and application whitelisting as well. So if you're looking at expensive products, that's going to be the start of this. And then from there, it's going to come down to getting good enterprise level L3 switches for segmentation. And then you're also going to have to design the network to make sure that you've got proper flow between all of this, because you're going to be running a lot of the traffic that's going from one point of the network to another through through these firewalls and through these switches. And I think that's the start of this, from that perspective.
Right. Obviously, yeah. So obviously, and I know a lot of MSPs are already pitching the concept or the need for a next gen firewall. And this is something that we've that I've talked to on a couple of other podcasts and webinars. But I think you touched on it a little bit as well. Is these devices out of the box. Obviously, you can look at all the different brands, but what's under the hood is really, really important. And just as important to that is around the standardizing and making sure that you're leveraging the features that need to be leveraged, not just turning them on. So I think there's some really good points that we can definitely talk about. So
no, I would agree. I mean, I think there's there are definitely different levels of technology, and one of the problems, like when I'm working with MSPs, is that we have a sense of complacency, in the sense that, oh, well, we've been using X product for the last 5 years. Everybody knows it. Everybody loves it. It's easy to deploy. We know what our profit margins are. Whereas when I'm looking at this from a cybersecurity standpoint, I'm always looking for the best possible product that's out there. And any product that I'm using right now, I fully believe is the best product out there, whether I'm looking at Forrester or Gartner or any one of the major scoring and ranking services. But we will rip people out of training and put them into new products as needed, to continuously improve on the network. And one of the things that we're looking at when we're talking about a zero trust network or a cyber defense strategy as well is continuous improvement planning. You don't have to start with a full-blown zero trust network. And I know I'm probably jumping ahead here a little bit, but we can incrementally grow this over time, continuing to harden the infrastructure as we go to make sure that we are mitigating fears of budget and mitigating fears of, drastic change all at once.
Right. Yeah. No. I think that's an important point. So this isn't an all or nothing. This can absolutely be phased or iterated on, which kind of touches on one of the other key concerns that I've heard a lot of people have, and I've already mentioned it, but jumping into a zero trust network, as you mentioned, so it involves quite a bit of setup in addition to hardware, and I know a lot of people I've talked to are also concerned around going that route effectively puts a lot of controls in place, and they're concerned about understanding and ultimately missing something. So your example earlier, two devices can talk using Word and Excel. They're concerned about, what happens if they miss PowerPoint, right? So, and then that actually blocks a business critical function, and they're incurring an extra cost to support that based off of something that they are pushing to their customers. So, do you have any recommendations in terms of in terms of how to handle that situation?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. I'll speak to the point of accidentally missing PowerPoint or blocking a business critical application. Typically, what we are doing when we are installing or about to install a zero trust network, it's usually into an existing infrastructure, is we're running analysis. We're dropping in application tracking, IDS firewalls, looking to see what applications are being used, and then we're sitting down and going with the client saying, okay, this is everything that you're running right now. Here's 100 applications, whatever it is. And then we are designing to allow those applications to go, excluding everything else. We also tell clients, it's like, okay, when we go live on, Monday morning or whatever it is, with this, we're going to be there. So if there is an application that is, blocked, that shouldn't be blocked, we're going to be there to tweak the infrastructure very quickly and make sure that it's up and running. So we are setting the expectation ahead of time for that. Now, if I am looking at this on a spectrum in terms of like missing things or afraid that gaps are going to come through, excuse me for a second, I got a cough. Sorry about that. We are looking at this on a spectrum. So if your client has absolutely no defense and they're running like the $50 router they bought at Best Buy or something like that, they are going to be infinitely more defended if you are putting in a zero trust network that, let's say, is missing 10% of traffic, right? And they're going to be significantly better when you catch that 10%. But everything that you do incrementally continues to lower the surface area for attack of your clients and their employees. And so we have to understand that that is the spectrum. I mean, your email is safe because you've got a good password. Well, it's a lot better now that you've enabled two-factor authentication. Now it's a lot better that you're no longer using text message for two-factor authentication because we can hijack SMS and you're using an authenticator app. Do you get what I'm saying here? And so if we are looking at this from a holistic standpoint, you are continuously moving, you are continuously improving. Well, we have to make sure that we are understanding the foundation of zero trust networking and how to apply and implement that. A lot of times the clients aren't necessarily going to know what applications they're using. And so you may have more lenient traffic coming through. And even if that traffic is coming through, it's still being pushed through threat detection. It's still going through a UTM. And so if I'm looking at it from that perspective, you are going to continuously tweak over time what you're doing to continuously improve. But as soon as you start deploying zero trust, even if it's in for lack of a better term, a weakened state, it's still significantly better than where they were.
I think that's a very, very important point. I loved your kind of example around the password front, but yeah, I think that's a really important point. Anything you do is vastly better than what they were doing before. Absolutely. So I think that raises a couple of really good points there. So just to maybe move on to another similar topic, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to focus too much on the objections too long. We'll talk about some positives soon. But one of the other things I also wanted to talk about is, and based off what you're explaining, it sounds like there's a huge technology element here. So next gen firewalls, talking about how your switching strategy. But are there non-technical aspects of this as well? Sort of kind of a bit of a mindset shift in terms of how you're thinking about designing these things?
Yeah, so I mean, any good cyber defense strategy, one of the critical elements and concepts of this, and if you're looking at any cybersecurity framework like NIST or CIS or ISO or CSA, one of the big aspects of this is awareness training, and that's role-based as well. Because if your individuals or employees don't know, or your clients rather as individuals and employees don't know not to pick up the flash drive or not to use the free wireless or do any of these things like answer the phishing emails, Prince Ubuntu needs your help from Nigeria kind of stuff, and we get people that answer those, then they end up being the biggest threat. And I gave a TED Talk in May called Trust Sucks, and it's specifically on the biggest flaw in cybersecurity. Is trust is the real vulnerability here. And so we have to have awareness training. Now, where I see a lot of MSPs fall down on this is the fact that they'll stick everybody in the organization, let's say of 100 users, however it is, they'll stick everybody in a room and they'll go through, hey, don't answer the phishing email, don't pick up the flash drive and all of that. But our awareness training actually has to be role-based. The admin to the CEO has significantly different access than the janitor, so why are we training them in the same way? So in that sense, we need to make sure that when we are running any kind of environment, but especially a zero trust networking environment where we are looking to mitigate outbreaks of infections, that the users aren't the threat vectors themselves. Oh, free flash drive at Starbucks. And what do? They walk it right through your perimeter, right through your defenses and plug it straight into a machine. And so when we're looking at stuff like that, I think the human element is one of the most important parts of a cyber defense strategy. And that is not technical at all. That is just straight up awareness and education.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think this kind of broaches the topic of zero trust is bigger than just networking. It's a much bigger, broader topic because there's not a lot of elements here that there's a lot of implied trust that can definitely cause issues like that. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And it's something that we have to continuously be improving on. And I mean, we've had cases where, hackers have literally spoofed, organizations like Chase Bank or Wells Fargo and have gotten the controller to walk them through logging in and then giving their 2FA token. I mean, it's a serious issue. And so the goal of any good cyber defense strategy is to lower the surface area for attack. And so we have to make sure that our workforce is that low surface area as well, because they're usually going to be our biggest vector.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so maybe let's flip to some of the positives in terms of. So we talked about why this is important. We talked about why, from a technical perspective, this is definitely something that makes sense to work with our customers. Understanding that, as we mentioned, you want to put strategies in place to make sure that you're configuring this adequately, not missing things. And I think one of the key points you mentioned there was observing the environment ultimately for a period of time before you to make a change, so you understand kind of what you're making. But as I wanted to kind of maybe move into the bit more the positive sides, because I see this as a huge opportunity, and cybersecurity as a whole, I think we'd all agree, is a huge opportunity here. Do you see this as, maybe this is a broad question, but do you see this being applicable to some verticals more than others, or do you see this as being an easier sell to more verticals than others?
So typically, those that fall under some kind of very hard compliance, like ITAR, so International Trafficking in Arms, that level of compliance where they have a lot of intellectual property that is government sponsored, tends to be pretty much requiring at this point. Other organizations that are medical based, like HIPAA, this is very good for data isolation as well. And so pretty much any US based compliance that has a need to protect data or intellectual property or PII or anything like that is ripe for a zero trust network environment. Now, that said, those clients that have an awareness, even if they don't fall under compliance, that have an awareness of the issues that are out there, or they see their friends or competitors getting hacked and hit, they're looking to us to create a cybersecurity solution for them that is going to mitigate those threats, or it's not going to cause them outage or downtime. And so the other vertical that we're typically looking at, which isn't necessarily a vertical, is those that require high availability. And so they may not necessarily fall under some kind of compliance, but they're going to lose a significant amount of money if they fall down, if they get an outage, if they have 100 machines and 98 are infected. That's a serious issue. But at this point, I have created zero trust networking for a handful of users up to thousands and thousands. So I think everybody is ripe for this. And when we start explaining this to our clients in terms of this is the next generation of cyber defense design, this is how we are actually protecting you. You see your competitor over there that got 1,000 machines hit. Well, we can make sure that the outbreak, goes to no more than a handful or down to one if they want to go that far with it. And so I think pretty much the planet, anybody in business that needs some kind of uptime or has intellectual property to defend, whether it's critical confidential data or design, compliant or not, is literally a right target for this. Anybody.
Yeah, and I love that angle because we always hear about PII going missing or data breaches and all that type of stuff. And I think those things are very well understood. But I don't think we hear nearly as much around the cost of downtime for these devices. So as you mentioned, like even if you look at like a retail shop or even a Starbucks as an example, if an organization like that were hit by an infection or an attack, it's not just the data breach that's the big concern. That's a concern. There's also the concern of they're probably out of business for a fairly significant amount of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, we have a perfect example of a complete failure and lack of control in the last month or so. So if you don't know who Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation is, they just got the contract to do all the processors for Apple's new iPhone. And they're in the process of gearing up. They got hit with a massive ransomware infection. Literally, this is like in the last month. I do daily videos. I did a daily video on this. It was unbelievable. Every single plant and over 10,000 computers they had got this virus that replicated through their point-to-point VPN system. And if they had even basic IDS and threat controls in place, they could have siloed this to the individual computer or the department or just the plant itself and not affected global production. It is absolutely critical as we're looking at stuff like this, because when we are looking at ransomware and code changes, we've got 15 to 20 million code changes a year. I can go in the dark web and buy malware from the Russian mob right now that will tell me what virus scanners it can evade. And so we have to be putting our threat detections in the perimeter, and we have to be building perimeters within the actual perimeter to the internet. I mean, at this point, it's kind of a no compromise situation. And I really believe that cybersecurity is one of those aspects in life that is a zero-sum game. You're either defended or you're not. And if you're putting in solutions that are not as effective, let's say you're 50% effective or 85% effective, well, that's a 15% hole a hacker's going to drive a truck through. And we can't have that mentality anymore. I mean, nobody wants clients breached on their watch. You have to put your best foot forward. We have to continuously improve these designs. Cybersecurity has been evolving for years, yet we continue to see the same perimeter-based technologies running over and over and over again. It's really time for a change.
Yeah, no, I know that message definitely resonates with me very well. Like if you look at the attacks that you see, even in the mainstream media, ultimately they're all exploiting very, very similar kind of rudimentary security systems, and it's surprising that most of these companies haven't adapted to that. But so I think another interesting point. So you mentioned the topic of segmentation, really important, especially around the concept of a zero trust network. So one of the things I wanted to ask is maybe some best practices around, if you look at segmentation, I'm sure there's a huge spectrum, right? Like you mentioned, you can isolate individual workstations or you can, or even sites like that. Do you have any best practices around establishing kind of, based off of a cost situation or an effort situation, where's the best line? Like, how do you choose how deep you should segment your network? What's your kind of thought process on determining how deep and how small those segments are?
Right. So at the end of the day, my goal with any of my clients is to segment literally everything. Every single device needs to be segmented and isolated and then run through, basically run through a UTM from a next generation firewall. However, we don't get there right out of the gate. And so if I'm looking at an organization, and we'll make one up, let's say this organization has 100 users and they have, let's say, 3 departments. They've got sales and accounting and service, okay? If I am looking at creating a foundational next generation firewall-based zero trust network for them, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it over time. So, perfect example, we're going to start with the actual perimeter, putting in a next generation firewall, and then what we may do is segment the sales from service from accounting, and so any kind of outbreak from within that perimeter is going to stay within sales, service, or accounting and not affect the other 2 out of the 3 branches of the organization. But baked into the plan is an understanding that, okay, in 6 months, we're going to be adding a secondary next generation firewall within accounting, so that now accounting is siloed in the way it should be. And then in 6 months, we're going to do service. And in 6 months, we're going to do this. We can build this incrementally, understanding that at the end of the day, we have we have out of the gate exactly what we want. And there are other things that we can do in design right now, even if we don't have the budget to buy a whole bunch of next generation firewalls. So for example, we can put all the IoT devices onto a physically separated network, on the other side of the perimeter, or run it through let's say the perimeter next generation firewall to make sure that IoT is siloed. We also will bandwidth limit, because most IoT doesn't need the full blown internet connection that it's given, and so we don't want those devices getting hijacked and weaponized. We can also look at wireless devices like guest wireless or employee wireless. Those may not necessarily need access to resources, and so we can silo the individual wireless devices like your iPhones or Androids and all of that, so that they can't talk to anything except out to the internet. And then they're still sitting behind a next generation firewall, so their traffic as they're going to and from the internet is in and out. So in that sense, we can build the foundational concepts with a good perimeter and then start enhancing the perimeter from there. And again, everything that we do is leading them towards complete isolation of absolutely everything. And I have several clients that are along that path right now, and usually I try to get them there within 12 months. On the outset, for larger organizations with multiple locations, it might be a couple of years, but we're starting that process basically immediately, and we are segmenting critical aspects or infrastructure right out of the gate. Another one of the things that we will do as well is with let's say that perimeter-based firewall, is we will put critical infrastructure, let's say a file server on the network, that's on the network, or let's say an RDS or terminal server. We will actually silo that individually. And so anybody trying to access a file is going to go through that UTM to pull up anything. So they can't infect the file server in case there's an outbreak. And so we can do these things with a minimal amount of infrastructure without having to hit, providing it's the right infrastructure, without having to isolate everybody right out of the gate. And so that is a foundation that we can typically build on.
Cool. Yeah, those are definitely great points. And I think I was talking to a couple of MSPs a while ago, and in terms of quick wins, and I think that's, everyone's looking to take the first steps and start moving forward. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but I've heard quite a few MSPs going down the route of, as long as there's not a lot of on-prem infrastructure, they're actually disabling or not giving access to the general wireless network to even the staff or the employees. They're even putting the staff on the guest network, which typically has additional segmentation there. Is that a practice that you've seen some companies use?
Yeah. I mean, because I'm all for isolation, if nobody gets wireless, great. Then I don't have a threat vector, I mean, so I'm perfectly fine with that. But I also understand the balance and need that corporations have. I mean, when we're looking at attracting and keeping millennial workers, wireless for their mobile devices is one of those things that organizations want to run. And you can run it through web filtering and all this kind of stuff, but there is zero reason for an employee's mobile phone that's personal to them, or a guest walking in the building, to be able to route to anything on that network except out to the internet. And even then, we're putting the guests behind UTM because we don't want them to get infected on our watch. But yeah, I am 100% for that. Segmentation as a foundational concept, or one of the aspects of zero trust networking, is absolutely critical. So the more segmentation, the better, hands down.
Yeah, and sorry, just to elaborate on that, what I was meaning was more even employees, they're rather than putting them on the general wireless network, they're actually just setting them up on the guest network itself.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if the guest network is isolated, their phones, if they're personal to them and not company issued, are guest phones. I mean, Think about it that way. They may work for you, but you don't own that phone. You can't force them to add the same defensive measures to their device. And there's been a lot of legal precedent where employees have left and companies have remote wiped, even if it's just isolating the aspects of the company issued app or data from the phone. And there have been lawsuits in U.S. court on that. So that's a serious problem that we face. And so the less access, the better for devices that are not within the corporation's control. I'm 100% for that.
Yeah, because like as you mentioned, like you a lot of these you can't control them, right? Especially as you start talking about millennials and obviously having devices connected all the time and doing different things. Generally there's a lot of hesitation to installing any corporate asset or application or additional security that'll cause other issues on in their experience. So there's a lot of hesitation generally to installing MDM on a non-corporate asset. So I think that's a whole different topic, but I think it's a great point of not allowing those devices on your general network, whether they're trusted employees or not, is absolutely an important point.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And again, I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to continuously lower the surface area for attack. That's what we do. The goal is to isolate and ensure that not one thing can knock out another thing. That's the most basic concept of it that everybody understands. And that is typically what gets my customers, my clients, and the MSPs I work with on board, because it's something that we just can't escape anymore. It's so prolific. It's so profound these days. And when we're looking at it, I mean, the first 6 months of 2018 alone, we had over 2,400 major breaches reported by large organizations and institutions worldwide. And we all know that number is a lie. I mean, we all know that it's significantly more because most don't disclose this. And so if our clients don't want to be the next one on the chopping block or the next one to add to that list of 2,400 worldwide, we have to start implementing solutions like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess before we start closing up and potentially even opening up to a bit of a Q&A, I just want to maybe ask you a bit of a broader question to see if you had any just other general advice around helping to position making this type of move to your customers. As you mentioned, there's some definitely some cost involved around parts, especially around next gen firewalls. There's obviously going to be some project work and labor around it. So do you have any other than what you talked about, any other recommendations around how to position this to your customers? Potentially even kind of packaging this in different ways as well?
Yeah, I mean, so you don't have to sit there and knock them over the head with things like zero trust networking in terms of concept, so much as it is giving them an understanding that we isolate your data, we isolate your traffic, we isolate your users, your phones, your this, because when you get an infection and you hear about your competitors or everybody in your industry or even other industries, getting knocked out for days because everybody's infected, this is what we're answering to. And while it may be a little bit more money, the peace of mind, the downtime, the outage, the understanding that if you're down for 2 days while I'm unscrewing you from some jerk that infected you, is going to mitigate vastly any increase in cost that you're seeing here is good. I mean, at the end of the day, the way I look at it is that we are in IT or cybersecurity, we're essentially a service industry. We all want to help people. We all want to keep people safe online. We all want to make sure that the solutions that we are putting in place, technological, cybersecurity, whatever it is, are not impeding their workflow, are not impeding the users. And so when I'm talking with clients, I am foundationally making them understand or trying to get them to understand the concept of basically what all cybersecurity and compliance falls into the umbrella of what is known as CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. And then I'm letting them know that this is the peace of mind that we can build. And a good cyber defense strategy like zero trust networking is not going to impede your workflow. If anything, it's going to make sure they're working better because now they don't have to worry about things. And that is typically the way we're looking at this. And so if I am talking to a business owner, let's say small to mid-size, this tends to resonate very well with them. If I'm looking at mid-size to enterprise, then I'm talking more about dollars and mitigation of risk because the CFO is looking at the bottom line. He's just trying to finance the CEO's vision. And so I can say, look, if you guys have an outage for 2 days, it's going to cost you 5 times more than what it's going to cost you up front to put this in. And you've seen your competitors hit. You are the largest target. And we have so many facts and statistics sitting out there for this, like, roughly, 63% of all breaches are integral to an organization from small to mid-size, meaning put you out of business potentially, damaging reputations. And so when I'm approaching this, I am approaching this as you're putting your confidence in me. We are your insurance policy. We are putting these things in place that make you infinitely more secure, for this. And we are continuously creating an improvement plan. I will schedule meetings at least quarterly, if not more, with my clients to say, here's where you are with technology. Here's the latest and greatest in terms of the advancements in cybersecurity, and here's where we need to be. And that generates revenue for me, but it also gives them peace of mind. I'm continuously attempting to improve on their networks, as we all should be able to do it. If you are setting up a network and letting it go, and then occasionally one of your techs walks in and says, oh yeah, they need a new firewall, that is not the same thing as directing the conversation. You become their de facto CIO and CISO, and you basically say, this is what you need to fund your vision, and this is how we're going to protect it. And I think that works very well for selling, at least for me and those I've coached with this. It tends to work well for them as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the thing I love about the whole security aspect, or the cybersecurity aspect, is it is very, very similar to just the rest of general MSP practices, right? What you talked about there, pitching, uptime, data availability, et cetera. These are all things that we've been talking about for years. I think this is just yet a new way to help them achieve those same objectives and same business functions. So I don't think it's definitely in the wheelhouse of the MSP, and I think that's an awesome and an exciting area for them to get into more.
Yeah, I think so. But I think a lot of MSPs also need to realize that they can't be complacent. They have to be looking and investing in new technologies, training and education. We can't stand still. I mean, I literally was up on stage earlier today, at the Cybersecurity Roadshow here in Austin, Texas, telling an audience of MSP owners, if you are using the same technology you were using 3 years ago because it's easy, it's convenient, it's all of these things, you are possibly years behind your competitors, and you're years behind where cyber defense and cybersecurity strategies have gone. We have to continuously be improving ourselves as we're continuously improving them as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a topic that I hear at Auvik talk a lot about as well, because we do see a lot of MSPs kind of gravitating to similar kind of systems and similar, especially on the vendor side. And we just released a really awesome report on that recently, talking about the diversification of devices and vendors we're seeing in networks. But we're definitely seeing a lot of complacency within people, as you described, around sticking with, this is the vendor I've always worked with, and this is the make and model I know. And some of the hesitation that actually comes from that is around, having to train your staff on the latest and greatest, and what's new, and how to manage this device versus something completely different from that we were working with previously. So there's definitely an education aspect. So I guess maybe before we wrap up, do you have any thoughts on that perspective?
In terms of education?
Yeah, so one of the chief concerns around switching from vendor A to vendor V or anything of the sort, kind of as you mentioned, being complacent around kind of sticking to what and what you've worked with in the past. One of the biggest points of hesitation,
right,
is
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying there's a time and learning investment in obviously staying on top of the latest and greatest. And just wondering if you, before we close, if you had any just general thoughts or strategies around that.
Right. So I will say this is one of the biggest differences, I think, between running a pure cybersecurity outfit and an MSP, is that we are constantly training. We are looking at new products. We are doing the R&D. And I think for an MSP, one of the most important things to understand is we need to have technicians that understand the foundational concepts and theories behind networking infrastructure. So, for example, if your employees cannot tell you, what a 0 and 1 means in bits and bytes, that's a problem. If they cannot understand, the transmission control protocol and TCP/IP, these are issues that we're going to have. And the reason why I say we need to have this foundational concept in this is because I can walk into any firewall that I don't necessarily know the interface for, and I know exactly the concept behind of what it's going to do, how it's going to move data, how it's going to filter. And when we come up with new concepts and new designs for protocols and theories, then I'm training on that. The rest of it is just learning the interface, which can be very easy or somewhat difficult depending on the learning curve of the product. But as long as we have that foundational concept for networking infrastructure, we have a much better idea of how to defend it, how to deploy it, and all of these things. And so I would urge any MSP that's out there, one, to make sure all of your techs that are doing infrastructure level work have this deep foundational knowledge and understanding of this, because it's going to make them infinitely easier to switch products and train moving forward. And so when I'm telling my audiences I'm ripping my people out of training and moving them from, you know, A to B because B is now just kicking butt everywhere, we do that, but my people are moving to that product with a foundational knowledge of how that product is going to work. So they're really more training on the interface and how to tweak it than they are actually understanding, okay, this is what TCP IP does. And I think that's where a lot of organizations and MSPs fall down on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and shamelessly on our side, that's absolutely what kind of the Auvik product is all about, is kind of helping techs be a little more vendor agnostic and understanding from a GUI perspective, you know, understanding from a monitoring, et cetera. So we won't get into that too much, but I think there's a really, really good points of how you can train your techs and making sure that they have that, at least that foundational knowledge. And as you mentioned, you know, it ultimately becomes more of a education exercise about an interface and less about the functions and functionality. So.
Exactly. But you have to have that foundation, or you're just doing nothing but asking for trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I think that explores that topic very, very well today. And again, I think we'll probably reconvene at a later time and dive a little bit deeper in terms of the technical roadmap, or kind of how we actually implement this type of network kind of in a couple different stages. But anyways, I wanted to just definitely thank you for your time today. We'll wrap up shortly, and when we definitely do have a few minutes to do a Q&A at the end. But yeah, before we get into that, I just wanted to thank you for your time. I really appreciate everyone that's on the call's time as well. It's definitely been a great webinar. If you're interested in the Auvik product itself, as I mentioned, you know, it helps solve that last problem around technicians having to learn new interfaces. The Auvik product helps you do the monitoring, the management, you know, backing up configurations, and also the dynamic and real-time network mapping, which is a huge part of understanding the network, how it is structured before you jump into a zero trust. You can definitely go ahead on our website and book a demo. We'll obviously also give you a $5 gift card as we mentioned up here. So definitely appreciate your time. So if anyone has any questions, let's go ahead and post them in the chat, and we'll just go through them one by one, and we'll go ahead and get started from there.
I see one from Ron Slater.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Ron writes, how do you manage, document, and maintain control over such a complex methodology long term? I can see issues with this approach long term with employee turnover. And I think, Ron, one, thank you for the question. Two, this basically comes down to asset management. And so there are a lot of great tools out there for asset management. I know a lot of MSPs are using things like, or PSAs like ConnectWise or AutoTask, TigerPaw, and I think there's a couple of others. A lot of these actually have asset management built in. And so when I am, let's say, creating and we'll use a very basic example here. Let's say I'm creating a zero trust network that is going to have one perimeter firewall and let's say 5 within the perimeter firewalls to create new perimeters or secondary segmented perimeters. I'm going to asset manage that in the same way in terms of like long-term that I am anything else. I'm going to asset tag everything, all hardware and software, and I'm going to be recording it in something like a ConnectWise. And then it is our job to run improvement meetings on on changes to the network. So as things get added, odds are as an MSP, they're going to order their equipment through you. And so right out of the gate, we're doing that. And so my people are trained to immediately make sure that they're entering all of that equipment into asset management. And then we have periodic reviews. And so if it's for a compliance-based client, those reviews might be very frequent. And for non-compliance, we try to do that every quarter. Now, we also have processes and procedures when it comes to employee turnover that we give our clients. So they say, okay, and a lot of clients, I'm sure all of you guys have heard this, you know, somebody calls you on Monday, like, oh yeah, we fired Bill on Friday, you know, go ahead and just delete all this stuff, you know, and it's like, well, okay, Bill had access all weekend. And so all of our clients are trained, and we really hammer it home to make sure that, okay, we are giving you the list. We are your IT provider, we're your cybersecurity provider. You need to, let us know before he is 24 hours before, and then we need to know when you're going to fire him, and then we need to disable passwords and lock out emails and do all those different things. But we're also going to be able to give them within that 24 hours an asset list of known assets that Bill has. And so when Bill leaves, we're expecting to get the laptop and the phone back, that kind of thing. And so you can do that and you can automate a lot of that stuff, but a lot of it comes down to, I think, also training staff as well, to make sure that they're on that. And when balls drop, then somebody's not doing their job, and then there are repercussions. So Ron, thank you for the question. Anyone else? I'm here for 6 minutes.
Yeah, I think there's actually a couple in the chat as well. So I'm just reading through some of them. So let me start with the one that just popped up. So what is the possibility and long term before there are no longer perimeter defense tactics needed, such as a firewall at the egress and an actual zero trust apps on each device?
So I don't see, for the record, I'll take this in chunks. I don't see the perimeter going away anytime soon. And so even if we're looking at, let's say, an organization that is all in the cloud and they're routing into the cloud. So in other words, their traffic is designed not to route anywhere else except to, let's say, AWS, Azure, whatever they're running. Then what we are doing is we're building a perimeter within that cloud, and we'll spin up virtual next generation firewalls to defend that perimeter. Now, we are creating a lot of new zero trust apps and tactics for isolation. But at the end of the day, what's going to end up happening is that typically what we have installed directly into the device, whether it's antivirus or some kind of agent, tends to be monitoring, but it usually tends to be reactive, which is why good cyber defense strategy takes our IDS and IPS straight to the perimeter, whatever that perimeter is, because we want to block the hackers, the infections, the brute force, whatever it is, before they're able to actually get to the device. And so I think I've answered that question fully. If I missed something, I apologize for that. But yeah, so I don't see perimeters going away fully. And as we continue to isolate and zero trust through, let's say, application tracking, we can also tie in more advanced cyber defense strategies as well, such as software-defined perimeter. So we're creating an identity-based management that we're tying into zero trust. And so if I'm running a zero trust network environment with application whitelisting, as well as something like software-defined perimeter, some people call it black cloud, then I'm infinitely more defended, because those gaps and holes for the device routing as well as device access is significantly curtailed.
Yeah, and Nick, just to add to that as well, I think I completely agree. I don't foresee them going away at that. And I think one of the other key points is around you talked about agents on devices and understanding zero trust apps and such. I think the other key point there is I think we're seeing a rise of devices that you can no longer deploy an agent to, meaning that like IoT devices and that type of thing, where we can't actually control it on the device itself or the application itself. So I think that's another key point around these zero trust networks, and the perimeter firewalls playing a very strong role long term.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think it's important, as we're looking at this in the future. And let's see. I'm sorry. I was reading one of the questions. Oh no, that's a Starbucks gift card. Never mind. Yeah. So yeah. No. Like I said, I completely agree with that, and we are. I think we're continuously improving on that model, but yeah, it's not. I don't think perimeter's going away anytime soon. Excuse me.
No, sounds good. And we have you for another 3 minutes. I think I'm just going to read through to see if there's any other questions, but. I think we covered most of them here.
Okay. All right.
Just We'll say, yeah, I think we are good. Oh, actually, sorry. Another question just came up for, do we offer a solution for a tenant in the cloud? If I'm understanding you correctly, I think there's a lot of different ways to think about that. Actually, Nick, did you want us to first start with around strategies around managing tenants in the cloud? Is that your question, or more around the Auvik solution? Okay, so I think it was more around the strategies for managing tenants in the cloud.
Okay, so typically, I mean, what we're doing is we are running isolated. We're not fans of multi-tenancy. You know, if we can't, if we can avoid it, if you will. Now that said, I mean, you can run. Let's use a basic example, like an Amazon S3 bucket. I mean, you can run. You can run your solutions in there, and you can lock them down into a zero trust environment using virtual firewalls. Now, will it replace a VDOM? No, I don't think so. I mean, we have, if we're looking at, you know, segmentation in that sense, like virtual domains, then what we're looking at is a way to isolate each one as it's talking. Am I answering the question for the record here? I'm not sure if I'm getting 100% of what the question is, and I want to make sure that I'm being clear on this. But we can go to something like you know, an S3 bucket or Azure or SoftLayer or something like that, and then isolate our assets in there, put them behind zero trust environments as well, and then limit the access to it. And then obviously, what we do things like IP lock, you know, as well as other things. Is that? Am I answering the question? I think I am, but I'm not. I think I'm understanding it right. Okay. So I guess I did. I don't know. I have not heard back. So with that.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think we're also running out of time here as well. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. So thanks again, Nick, and thanks again for everyone that's joined our webinar. I think we'll, as we mentioned earlier, we can send out a recorded copy of this just in case if you want to get a chance to review it. And again, thanks a lot for everyone's time, and thanks again specifically to Nick for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you all for attending, and hope you guys learned something.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a great day.